It seemed at first that the world would be denied the incredibly handsome and cinematically magnetic presence that was Tyrone Power. His doctors in turn doomed the frail Tyrone to an early grave as a child. But although he was weak, he was a fighter, and Power made it to adulthood against all odds. Some people might have approached life with caution after this kind of beginning, but Power was hungry for life and was ready to grab as much of it as he could, while he still could. His love life was wild and passionate, and his performances on the silver screen transcended those of any mere character actor and turned him into a star. Then one icy cold Spanish morning, dressed in the robes of a biblical king, the world shattered. This is the story of Tyrone Power, the star who was never meant to live. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Tyrone Power was born on May 5, 1914, in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the only son of Frederick Tyrone Edmund Power, a prominent English-born actor of both stage and screen, and Helen Emma Padilla Riam, a gifted stage and film actress. The Power family's ties to the theater were deep and pretty distinguished. Tyrone's father was known professionally as Fred Power, and he came from a long line of celebrated actors. His great-grandfather, also called Tyrone Power, was a famous Irish actor and comedian in the early 18th century. Another ancestor, Maurice Power, was a Shakespearean actor before his early death in 1849. There can be no doubt that acting was in the blood of the Power family. As if this mighty acting ancestry wasn't enough, Tyrone was also distantly related to Laurence Olivier, a man often regarded as the greatest Shakespearean actor of the 20th century, and who was, of course, a major movie star. While Fred Power was evidently an influence on his son's desire to act, he was a distant and often absent father. His life on stage in New York and voracious taste for infidelity kept him away from home a lot. Meanwhile, Tyrone was a very weak and sickly child. His frail condition prompted his mother to move the family to California in 1915, on a doctor's recommendation. She hoped the warm climate and Pacific air would give her child a fighting chance of survival. Shortly after the move, Tyrone's younger sister, Anne Power, was born, but this did little to improve things between Fred and Padilla, and they separated. In 1917, Fred and Padilla did actually briefly reunite to appear in the film The Planter, but their marriage was all but over, and they divorced in 1920. Following the separation, Padilla threw herself into her career. She performed with a whole variety of stage stock companies and regional theater groups. Tyrone's first taste of acting came at the age of 7, when he appeared alongside his mother in a California production of La Golondrina, a mission play. This was a pretty remarkable turnaround, as doctor after doctor had little to say to Padilla about her son other than to tell her to prepare for the worst. The only diagnosis on offer was that Tyrone was unable to assimilate his food, as they termed it, meaning he was starving to death. The young boy was down but not out, and he struggled for life and pushed himself to continue learning the family acting trade, as well as reading a lot. This mental strength in the California air had a positive effect, and he began to strengthen. After some time in California, Padilla returned to Cincinnati, where she became a drama and vocal coach at the Schuster Martin School of Drama. She continued to nurture Tyrone's budding interest in acting through private lessons at home. Tyrone later attended the preparatory school at the University of Dayton, and this really laid down the foundation for what would become an amazing career in film and theater. By the time Tyrone Power turned 16, his love for the performing arts was already taking shape. He worked as an usher at Cincinnati's Orpheum Theater and attended Catholic schools including Xavier Academy through 9th grade. After graduating from Purcell High School in 1931, where he starred as the lead in the school play, Officer 666, Power decided to pursue acting more seriously. That summer, at 17, he joined his father in Quebec, mostly as an observer, to watch him work in theater. He finally impressed his emotionally distant father with his persistence, and even participated as a super in several performances of The Merchant of Venice, at the Chicago Civic Auditorium. It seemed like father and son were set to build a new relationship founded on Tyrone's interest and growing skill as an actor, just like his dad. But this breakthrough would be torn apart by an awful tragedy. On December 23, 1931, while staying at the athletic club in Los Angeles after a day on set filming The Miracle Man, his father suffered a massive heart attack and died in 17-year-old Tyrone's arms. The devastating loss left Power reeling. Just as he thought he had found a way into his father's heart, that same heart had stopped beating forever. Following the funeral in Anaheim, Quebec, he returned to California, determined to find acting work. Despite knocking on countless doors, opportunities were scarce, and without his father's support, Power found himself struggling financially and lacking experience. Tyrone Power was Saturday afternoons. Actress Piper Laurie would later reflect when she looked back at the career of the matinee idol. But in the early 1930s, Power's road to fame was anything but smooth, and success looked like a long shot at best. His first film role came in the 1932 production of Tom Brown of Culver. Though it was a minor part, Power hoped it might lead to something bigger. Unfortunately, it didn't. His next role, little more than an extra in Flirtation Walk, also failed to open any new doors. Frustrated and frozen out of Hollywood, he switched to community theater, and he won a role in Lo and Behold at the Pasadena Community Playhouse in 1933. When acting opportunities dried up, Power took a job as a chauffeur for Arthur Caesar, a screenwriter and friend of his father. Caesar saw potential in the handsome young actor and encouraged him to head to New York City, where he could work on his skills on stage. Power decided this was good advice, so he set off for New York. Caesar's advice turned out to be very wise. Before long in the city, Power met a New Yorker who would change the course of his career. Katharine Cornell, one of the most celebrated stage actresses of the era. Cornell saw promise in Power and cast him as an understudy for Burgess Meredith in Flowers of the Forest. He worked hard and showed the first signs of the star power which would later bring him to international fame. Cornell then gave him a better role as Benvolio in her production of Romeo and Juliet. This impressive performance finally put Power on the radar of Hollywood scouts, who were quick to offer him a screen test. Cornell, however, told Power to wait. She believed he needed more experience before making the leap to film, and assured him that Hollywood would come calling again. He trusted Cornell, and so Power stayed with the stage and continued Cornell's next production, St. Joan. Katharine Cornell's instincts about Tyrone Power's readiness for Hollywood proved to be pretty much spot on. When studio scouts came calling again, this time she gave her blessing. She knew he was finally ready, and she saw him off when he returned to Los Angeles. He signed with 20th Century Fox, who decided to play it cautiously and give him a start with small roles, including a brief appearance in Northern Frontier in 1935. But he was magnetic on screen, and audiences were becoming curious. Fox knew they had uncovered a gem, and from here Power's career took off. In fact, Fox marketed him as their answer to MGM's Robert Taylor, who was one of the biggest stars in the world. Power's marketing fluff pieces referred to him as everyone's romantic lead. The big break should have come in Sing Baby Sing, and the chance was thanks to Alice Faye, who was one of the studio's biggest stars at the time. Faye personally requested Power for the film, but director Sidney Landfield wasn't impressed. He fired Power and told him he'd never succeed as an actor, and that he ought to go work in an office job. Power had been through worse than this, however, and he wasn't about to be deterred by Landfield. Faye continued to advocate for him. She got him a small role in Girls' Dormitory. Though his screen time was limited, Power's looks had caused plenty of hot flushes, not least famed gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, who sat through 5 screenings just to figure out who the striking young man was. Faye later said, "He wasn't arrogant, he wasn't full of himself, but I've never seen anyone as handsome as Ty." Girls' Dormitory helped Power land a larger part in Ladies in Love, alongside stars like Jeanette Gaynor, Constance Bennett, and Loretta Young. Despite this building momentum, the studio was actually considering dropping him at this point. Power knew he had to save himself, so he approached director Henry King to ask for a role. King was pretty taken by Power's good looks and quiet confidence, and he offered him the lead in Lloyd's of London. King later said, "Tyrone Power was one of the genuine professionals among the actors I've dealt with. I suppose craftsman might be another proper term." The timing couldn't have been better. Ladies in Love had just debuted. Teenage girls were lingering outside the gates asking for Tyrone Power. Lloyd's of London turned this interest into near-mass hysteria. The film was a hit, and Power became an overnight sensation. The production wasn't without its drama. Loretta Young, the original female lead, walked out on the film when her role was scaled back to make way for the studio's star build-up for Power, and she resented Power for stealing her thunder. She was replaced by Madeleine Carroll. Director King later reflected, "I'm proud of the fact that Ty and I got along so famously, both on screen and off. We were good friends." Lloyd's of London, Tyrone Power officially stepped into the limelight. He had proved his worth to Fox, and they were ready to back him. Variety gushed about his talent and charisma, writing, "He has looks and acting ability. The women ought to go for him in a big way." The Los Angeles Examiner added to the chorus of approval in their review, which read, "Not in a long time has there been a player so dynamic and promising." By 1937, Power was solidifying his place as a leading man. He starred in Café Metropole, playing a young American who, deeply in debt to a Parisian nightclub owner, is coerced into wooing a wealthy heiress to steal her fortune. The film paired Power with Loretta Young again, who had seemingly cooled down after leaving Lloyd's of London in a huff. That same year, he also made a cameo as himself in Ali Baba Goes to Town, a comedy reimagining of Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Another standout from 1937 was Thin Ice, directed by Sidney Landfield, the same man who had once dismissed Power as unfit for acting. In the film, Power starred alongside Sonja Henie, a Norwegian Olympic skating champion who was making her mark in Hollywood. The light-hearted plot revolved around a skating and skiing instructor at a Swiss resort who falls for a prince disguised as a regular skier. The film's snowy scenes were shot on location at Mount Rainier in Washington state, and Power even participated in some of the skiing scenes alongside Henie. They seemed to have developed a fizzling chemistry on the ice, and they were taking the chemistry off-screen with them too. The athletic and beautiful Henie presented herself to the world as the embodiment of Nordic wholesomeness. But in truth, she was known as a voracious and energetic lover, one who left Power sprawled on her dressing room floor in exhaustion after their relentless lovemaking. And they could not get enough of each other, with their fiery affair continuing after the shoot. Power closed out 1937 with Second Honeymoon, when he was paired once again with Loretta Young. The story followed a wealthy but restless newlywed who runs into her charming ex-husband. One of the film's most memorable moments features Power lighting 2 cigarettes in his mouth, one for him and one for her, a gesture often copied in later films as a way of showing a kind of romantic intimacy. In 1938, Power reunited with Alice Faye and Don Amici for In Old Chicago, a historical drama set against the backdrop of the Great Chicago Fire. Power played Dion O'Leary, the rogue brother of Amici's upstanding character, Jack O'Leary. The story culminated in a spectacular 20-minute sequence depicting the fire itself. The scene, costing $150,000 to produce, burned for 3 days on the studio lot, and became one of the most insane and unforgettable cinematic moments of its time. Meanwhile, his relationship with Henie had finally fizzled out, but Power was building a reputation as Hollywood's most eligible bachelor, much to the delight of the studio. This mirage of attainability for female fans was fueling the mania they felt about Power. Meanwhile, he was living up to the bachelor lifestyle with enormous enthusiasm. He had an affair with another beautiful blonde, Claire Trevor, an actress he met when they had starred in Second Honeymoon. He then had a brief engagement to the mysterious Evie Abbott, who was nicknamed the Dragon Lady, and who later married actors Van Johnson and Keenan Wynn. However, he was secretly hoping to meet the right woman, and the studio was equally keen to stop him from ever doing that, as we will see later on. In 1938, Tyrone Power reunited with the cast of In Old Chicago for the musical Alexander's Ragtime Band, which featured a score by Irving Berlin. The film, set in San Francisco in 1915, was both a showcase for Berlin's music and a tribute to the wild and heady days of ragtime bands. The film became a monument to Irving Berlin, with a hefty budget of $2 million and 3 months of filming. The filming of Jesse James was a major production. The crew used 6 different locations in Missouri, including McDonald County, as well as shoots in Los Angeles and Jamestown, California. The film's impact on the local community was immense. The town was abuzz with excitement, as townsfolk could frequently be seen chatting with Power and co-star Henry Fonda at the local cafe. The filming demanded a large number of extras, including 150 locals, as well as period props like buggies, wagons, and horses. The set was so enormous and spectacular that crowds of around 5,000 people gathered to watch the shooting. While working on Jesse James, director Henry King offered Power the opportunity to join him on a flight to a location in Missouri. Power's curiosity about the plane's controls led King to let him take the wheel for a short time. Power was thrilled by the freedom and joy of flying an aircraft, still fairly recent technology in the 1930s. Upon returning to Hollywood, Power took flying lessons and eventually became a licensed pilot. During the filming of Jesse James, Power became involved with a local woman, and the affair resulted in her pregnancy. A major scandal was brewing, and so the studio went to DEFCON 1 and made sure the child was put up for adoption, and the whole story covered up as much as possible. Power spent considerable amounts of money over the next decade trying, without success, to locate the child. By this point, Power's fame had grown so vast that in 1938 the amount of fan mail was second only to the beloved child star, Shirley Temple. His fame continued to soar, and in 1939 he was loaned to MGM Studios for the film Marie Antoinette. While Gary Cooper was first considered for the role of the French king, Norma Shearer advocated for Power. This sounded like a big favor from Shearer, but Power wasn't convinced by the project. 20th Century Fox talked him around and loaned Power out, but Zanuck later regretted it, feeling the role didn't suit his leading man persona. He made it clear that he would never loan Power to another studio again. Also in 1938, Power starred in Suez, yet another film that reunited him with Loretta Young. In the movie, Power portrayed Ferdinand de Lesseps, a junior diplomat who realizes that building a canal through the Isthmus of Suez would be a revolutionary idea. However, the production was one of many that fell victim to the Hays Code. The censors were particularly unhappy about a revealing scene featuring the French actress Annabella. The real de Lesseps family even sued the studio, upset over the fictionalized romance between Power's character and Annabella. Ultimately, the case was dropped, with the studio arguing in court that the idea of an important Frenchman having a mistress was not going to negatively change international perceptions of France too much, as the de Lesseps had claimed in their case. During an interview that year, journalist Lucy Neville asked a group of male stars about their reasons for not getting married. Most responded with financial concerns, as alimony laws at the time were heavily skewed against men. When it was Power's turn, he paused before answering. "I just don't want to get married. Now, I've often wished I had a good answer to that question. Why haven't you married? But I can't name one except I just don't want to." The truth is probably that he had been playing along with the studio's desire to keep him a bachelor for as long as it suited him. But now he was beginning to change his mind, and the woman who changed his mind was the one at the center of the Suez controversy, Annabella. In April 1939, he married Annabella, whose real name was Suzanne Georgette Charpentier, and adopted her daughter Annie in the process. Annabella was one of the most sought-after stars in Europe, and well known in the US, so the pairing with Power was major news worldwide. The news of their engagement was much to the dismay of studio head Darryl Zanuck. Fearing that Power's appeal to his devoted female fan base might be jeopardized, Zanuck geared up to try and get the French star away from his man. His first tactic was coercion, which he undertook by offering Annabella some very appealing roles in European productions, hoping to send her overseas. However, Annabella stood her ground and refused to play along. Her career could wait. She was in love. Zanuck wasn't in any mood to be hardballed by Annabella, so he upped the ante. If she wouldn't take his generous offer to disappear to Europe with a huge salary and a plethora of great roles at her disposal, then Zanuck would ensure she would never work again. He used his power to blacklist Annabella from work in the US and Europe, effectively ending her cinematic career at a stroke. An indignant Annabella merely announced she was returning to her first love, the stage, as well as beginning a new career in radio drama. Zanuck was even more enraged to hear that her new husband would be joining her. They appeared together in several radio dramas, including Blood and Sand, The Rage of Manhattan, and Seventh Heaven. The first was an adaptation of the story Power would later famously bring to life alongside Rita Hayworth. The other two were part of the Lux Radio Theater, a popular program known for its anthology of dramatic productions. On stage, the couple performed in Lilium at the Country Playhouse in Westport, Connecticut. The steamy, emotionally intense play, written by Ferenc Molnar, had initially flopped during its Budapest debut in 1909, but was a hit in New York. The story of doomed love would later inspire the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, Carousel. These projects with his wife were not at the expense of his movie career, and he was still taking on major roles. In fact, it seemed as though everything was going swimmingly, at least aside from the scheming Zanuck's attempt to ruin his wife's career. Power felt it was time to move into a new home with his beloved, but when he went to make the purchase, Power discovered he was nearly broke. This seemed impossible. He was not a reckless spender, and in any case, he had been earning enormous salaries for his recent films. There was no way he could be so poor, and yet the figures were staring him in the face. Something was amiss, so he launched an investigation into his financial affairs. He learned that his uncle and business manager, Frank, had been embezzling his earnings. True to his reputation for avoiding public confrontations, Power chose to quietly manage the situation and kept the scandal out of the spotlight. Once the situation was taken care of, and their new home was ready, another major threat was looming. War had broken out in Europe, and Annabella's home city of Paris was right at the center of the conflict. There were fears that Paris would be captured by the Germans, and Annabella wanted to return to her homeland so she could volunteer in the Red Cross. This distance was the first major strain on their relationship, which was not destined to last. In her absence, he began a tumultuous affair with Judy Garland, who was at the peak of her enormous fame. She was madly in love with Power, and begged him to divorce Annabella so they could be together. But Annabella had already divorced once so she could marry Power. She flatly refused another divorce so soon. Meanwhile, she had begun her own affair with British author Roald Dahl. On screen, Power remained one of Hollywood's busiest and most bankable stars. In 1939, he was back on screen with his lover Sonia Henney in Second Fiddle. The film follows a studio publicist who transforms a Minnesota skating instructor into a Hollywood star, only to chase her back to the Midwest when she returns home. The casting search for Henney's character became so notorious that it was compared to the exhaustive quest for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. The film premiered at the Roxy Theater in New York to great fanfare. That same year, Power headlined Daytime Wife, alongside Linda Darnell, who was just 15 years old at the time. Darnell apparently drove Power crazy with her inexperience, as well as having to break in the middle of their scenes so she could attend school lessons. Power also appeared in The Rose of Washington Square with Alice Faye and Al Jolson. He then had a cameo as himself in Hollywood Hobbies, which was a warm-up to the drama The Rains Came, where he co-starred with Myrna Loy. Set in India, the film follows a married British aristocrat who reconnects with a former lover, only to find herself captivated by a dashing surgeon played by Power. As usual, there were rumors that Power had begun an affair with his leading lady, but in this case it was unfounded. Loy described him as one of the nicest human beings she had ever known. However, she jokingly lamented, "I'm sorry to report that we weren't lovers. I loved him, but he was married to that damn Frenchwoman." If you'd like to hear more about Myrna, I have a whole video on her life which you can check out in the link on screen now, and down in the description. Naturally, I go into plenty of detail about her amazing on-screen chemistry with William Powell, and while we're on the subject of Powell, I'd like to give you a reminder that I have a range of Hollywood Mysteries merch, featuring exclusive designs, including the latest shirt, William Powell. You can check it out at the store linked below. It would make a great gift for any Nick and Nora fans in your life. We also have designs featuring Pola Negri, Anna May Wong, Steve McQueen, Peter Lorre, and others. Also, our Patreon supporters get a discount on merch, as well as access to our weekly essays and photo collection, which we put up on Patreon and in our YouTube members area for those of you who have signed up. I'd like to give a big welcome to all our new members and a huge thank you to all my supporters, both on Patreon and as YouTube channel members. And a very special thanks to our top tier supporters, Dina and Jeff. It really makes all the difference. But let's get back to Tyrone Power. The production of The Rains Came was as dramatic as its storyline. Creating the film's flood scenes required a staggering 33 million gallons of water, with 50 of the 100 shooting days devoted to man-made rain and floods. Despite the technical spectacle, Power's performance earned him the dubious distinction of being the first actor to receive the Harvard Lampoon's Worst Actor Award for his role. Another dramatic turn came with Brigham Young in 1940, in which Power played the titular leader guiding the Mormon community to their new home in Utah. The film was fairly successful, but Power was growing tired of these roles. Frustrated with playing virtuous leading men, Power expressed a desire to take on more meaningful, complex roles. "I'm sick of all these knights in shining armor parts," he said. "I want to do something worthwhile like plays and films that have something to say." His push for a shift in his screen persona led to Johnny Apollo, a crime drama where Power played the son of a disgraced Wall Street broker who turns to crime to fund his father's release from prison. The role allowed Power to explore darker themes and complex familial dynamics. He hit a high mark later on that year with the release of The Mark of Zorro, his first major swashbuckler film, and one of his most enduring classics. Co-starring Linda Darnell, the movie tells the story of a young Spanish aristocrat who adopts the guise of the flamboyant Zorro to secretly fight for justice in colonial California. The film was a remake of the 1920s silent version starring Douglas Fairbanks, whose acrobatic performance as Zorro was legendary. While some doubted Power could live up to Fairbanks' physicality, he brought his own flair to the role. Power didn't try to replicate Fairbanks' high-flying stunts, but his duel with Basil Rathbone remains one of the most celebrated sword fights in cinematic history. Rathbone, an accomplished swordsman himself, said, "Power was the most agile man with a sword I've ever faced before a camera." In 1941, he starred with Rita Hayworth in the drama Blood and Sand, playing an illiterate peasant who rises to fame as a matador. A remake of Rudolph Valentino's 1922 melodrama, Blood and Sand was filmed in Mexico City's Plaza de Toros. Although this time centered on bullfighting, the movie was a natural follow-up to The Mark of Zorro. It was also a rare instance where Hayworth was not in the spotlight as the romantic lead, a task taken on by Linda Darnell. Power's performance showed his ability to tackle serious, dramatic roles. His time as a matinee idol was coming to a close, and a serious actor was beginning to emerge. In 1942, Tyrone Power was back to swashbuckling in The Black Swan, alongside Maureen O'Hara. This adventure followed an ex-pirate as he grappled with unruly buccaneers and navigated a volatile romance with a headstrong, aristocratic woman. The film's production took the crew to picturesque locations, including Jamaica, Honduras, Cuba, and Mexico, with additional scenes shot in the United States. That same year, Power appeared in Son of Fury, the story of Benjamin Blake. Described as a 98-minute epic tale of redemption, the film, set in the era of King George, tells the story of Benjamin Blake, a bonded servant wrongfully accused of escaping and attempting to harm his sister. His true noble lineage is only revealed after a dramatic series of events. This was Power's first collaboration with Gene Tierney, who would later star with him in The Razor's Edge and That Wonderful Urge. Power's final film before enlisting in World War II was Crash Dive. The movie centered on a love triangle involving a submarine lieutenant, his commanding officer, and the woman they both fall for. Co-starring Ann Baxter, the film allowed Power to postpone his military service until shooting was completed. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Tyrone Power had enlisted in the Marine Corps. Although he lacked the college degree needed to qualify for officer candidate school at Quantico, he declined any studio intervention to bypass this requirement. Having already learned to fly, his intention was to become a glider pilot, and he delayed his enlistment only long enough to finish filming Crash Dive. By the time he had reached the rank of lieutenant, he had logged 180 hours of solo flight time. Power's prior flying experience earned him a spot in an accelerated training program at the Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi, Texas, where he trained as a multi-engine pilot. In 1944, he officially earned his wings. He then went on to attend flight instrument school at NAS Atlanta, a standard part of preparation for transport pilots. A retired Marine flight instructor, Jerry Taylor, remembered him as an exceptional student, saying, "He was an excellent student, never forgot a procedure I showed him or anything I told him." Although Power had a taste for risk, he proved to be a skilled and dependable pilot. As a lieutenant, Power served in the Pacific Theater, flying missions with the VMR 352 Squadron. He moved from El Centro to Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, and later flew out of Saipan in the Mariana Islands. His aircraft, the R-5C, a Curtiss 46 Commando adapted from a commercial airliner design, was used to transport supplies into Iwo Jima. He also undertook dangerous missions to evacuate wounded soldiers, often under enemy fire. Powell recounted a particularly perilous mission where Power was ordered to ditch the plane in the ocean. He flew in at 50 feet above the water with the island under heavy assault and low on fuel. There was a pea soup fog, but the ocean was like glass. Power made a perfect landing. Within 15 minutes, the plane sank and the Coast Guard picked us up. Power broke his leg getting out of the plane. Tyrone Power returned from World War II with a collection of honors, including the American Campaign Medal, 2 Bronze Stars, and the World War II Victory Medal. Promoted to captain, he stayed in the reserves but was not called back for service during the Korean War. However, his homecoming was far from smooth. His marriage to Annabella was falling apart, though they both committed to reconciling. After his discharge in Seattle, they took a second honeymoon in an attempt to heal from their wartime separation. In 1943, Power appeared as himself in Show Business at War, but his first real role after returning was in The Razor's Edge. This wartime drama, based on W. Somerset Maugham's philosophical 1944 novel, explored the tension between materialism and spirituality. The story followed Larry Darrell, a World War I aviator who returns home disillusioned and embarks on a journey to find the meaning of human existence. Set across Chicago, Paris, and India in the 1920s and 1930s, the film tackled profound questions about life and purpose. Reviews were positive, with the New York Times noting, "A hardened Tyrone Power was surprisingly convincing." The film earned a nomination for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, although some critics like Barry Bradford argued that Power seemed too mature for the role, despite being only 30. Bradford partially blamed the director and lighting design for making Power look older. Power's next major project was Nightmare Alley, a film noir adaptation of William Lindsay Gresham's 1946 novel. Power had to fight hard to secure the role, as producer Daryl Zanuck believed the dark, cynical story would damage his image. The plot followed a carnival worker who aspires to infiltrate Chicago's elite with a mentalist scam. The film, with its bleak tone and exploration of human vulnerability, was neither a mystery nor a thriller, but instead left audiences with what one critic called a soul sickness feeling. Despite excellent reviews for Power's performance, Zanuck undermined the film by pulling most of its promotional efforts and limiting its release. It went on to become a cult classic and was superbly remade by Guillermo del Toro in 2021. For the 1947 production, Fox constructed a massive 10-acre carnival set, complete with over 100 sideshow attractions, which was a major commitment to authenticity for what was considered a B-movie. Power himself had advocated for purchasing the rights to the novel, and he really believed in the strength of the story. Many regard his performance as his finest, with critics praising his transformation in the film's final act. His character's descent into madness was so convincing that it was believable when his friends failed to recognize him. To mitigate the bleakness of the original ending, Zanuck ordered a more optimistic reunion scene to be added. But even this adjustment could not save the film from obscurity. In retrospect, Nightmare Alley is considered a landmark in Power's career. It showed his willingness to break away from his romantic leading man image and embrace a darker, more complex role. The story's enduring message, that we're all susceptible to being taken in, remains relevant and haunting to this day. By 1947, Tyrone Power had returned to more traditional roles, starring in Captain from Castile. Filmed in Mexico, the production became a hotbed for rumors when Lana Turner visited him on set. The visit happened to coincide with Annabella's announcement that she and Power were separating, due to incompatibility of careers. She later said, "We were terribly sad about it, both of us, but we knew we were drifting apart. I didn't think then, and I don't think now, that it was his fault or mine." For studio head Daryl Zanuck, this was welcome news. Zanuck had also been eager to distance Power from the dark tone of Nightmare Alley, and hurried the release of Captain from Castile to shift public perception. The production, however, was rushed through rehearsals and filming to meet this goal. Lana Turner had a famously tumultuous romantic history, including 7 marriages, 8 if one counts marrying Stephen Crane twice. Nonetheless, Turner described Power as the love of her life. The two had known each other for years, but Power's marriage to Annabella had kept their relationship platonic. After his separation, he invited Turner to his home for a drink. A kiss during that visit changed everything, and Turner admitted she was hooked forever. During her visit to Mexico, Turner was supposed to be filming Green Dolphin Street, and was technically barred from leaving her own set. Nevertheless, she found a way to sneak out to be with Power. She was convinced that they would marry. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was initially thrilled. There was only one problem in Lana's grand plan. Power was not really in love with her, and saw the affair as something of a rebound after the heartbreak of the end of his marriage. Power was also looking for something that he couldn't find in a relationship with a woman. Meanwhile, the filming of Captain from Castile and Michoacan was beset by its own share of drama. The eruption of the Paricutin volcano disrupted production, making lighting conditions wildly unpredictable and significantly jacking up costs. Still, the film delivered enough swashbuckling excitement to please cinemagoers. As the production wrapped, Power embarked on a whirlwind promotional tour, covering 32,000 miles and visiting 18 countries. For a brief moment, life seemed full of excitement and promise. That same year, Power was awarded an honorary arts degree from the University of Tampa, where he delivered the 1948 commencement address. Known for keeping every script he ever worked on, Power took great pride in revisiting those bound volumes, often reflecting on the roles he had played and the ones that had intrigued him. While Power was away on his globe-trotting trip, Turner used their agreed-upon code phrase, "I found the house today," to inform him of her decision to terminate the pregnancy. According to accounts, this decision was incredibly painful for her, with one source describing it as the hardest thing Lana ever did in her life, which is some claim when you consider the pretty extraordinary things Lana got up to, which, by the way, you can hear about in our 2-part special on Lana, linked on screen now and in the description below. The procedure was allegedly arranged by Howard Strickling, MGM's fixer, who was rumored to have orchestrated a similar arrangement for Power and Judy Garland earlier in the decade. Power's world tour took him across 4 continents in a plane nicknamed the Geek, which was a reference to the character in Nightmare Alley. The aircraft, a sleek silver DC-3, provided by Howard Hughes, carried a small crew, including pilot Bob Buck, navigator Bob Stevens, and publicist Jim Denton. Power spent most of the journey behind the controls, piloting the plane himself through destinations like Puerto Rico, Ethiopia, Italy, and Greenland. Along the way, he met global figures including Pope Pius XII, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, and Field Marshal Jan Smuts of South Africa. Upon his return, Power remarked the prettiest girls collectively were in Iceland. Power returned rejuvenated. Lana assumed their relationship would continue, but Power had moved on. Her affection for him ran far deeper than his feelings for her. While on this journey, Power met someone more important to him than any emperor or field marshal. He encountered Linda Christian in Rome, although it was a meeting that seemed less coincidental and more meticulously planned by Christian herself. Born Blanca Rosa Welter in Mexico, Christian had an international upbringing and a diverse background. Fluent in 6 languages, she was highly educated and excelled in dance and swimming. She had been discovered by Errol Flynn, and she later became known as the first Bond girl and a muse for Diego Rivera. Turner was heartbroken when she learned he had met someone new during his travels in Europe. She had called his suite constantly, with no response. Finally, she called late and Power answered. Lana allegedly said, "Where have you been all evening? Tell me that you love me." Power said, "I love you," out loud, but while looking into the eyes of Christian, who was in bed with him while Lana was on the phone. Reflecting on their time together, Lana later admitted, "No man except possibly Tyrone Power took the time to find out that I was a human being, not just a pretty, shapely little thing. That could have been my fault. I didn't know myself." Power's growing doubts about Turner, including suspicions of her involvement with Frank Sinatra, likely influenced his decision to marry Christian in January 1949. The ceremony took place at the Church of Santa Francesca in Rome, drawing an estimated 10,000 fans. The event was called the Wedding of the Century, and it even included a blessing from Pope Pius XII. While Christian's fame was largely tied to her marriage to Power, those who knew her appreciated her intelligence and outgoing personality. A contemporary once noted, "When it comes to fun, she can be as noisy as the moment suggests." Power's marriage to Linda Christian was passionate but turbulent, and their attempts to have children were fraught with heartbreak. Christian suffered several miscarriages, and their son was tragically stillborn. The strain added to an already volatile relationship, and one of the main reasons he had wanted to marry Christian was to start a family. He was struggling with his inability to successfully bring a child into the world with her. On top of this, his marriage was supposed to bring about a time of peace for Power. Not only had he been caught up with the often unstable Lana Turner, he had allegedly embarked on an altogether riskier affair, one which, had it ever reached the press, would have ended his career in an instant. In 1946, he made a firm new friend in Cesar Romero. The physically imposing Romero had long been a favorite in typical Latin lover roles of the era, sending women swooning in theaters across the world. However, Romero's sexuality had long been a topic of speculation in Hollywood, and even then it was considered common knowledge that he was gay. Romero was intensely private about his love life, and he never married or had any children. Upon meeting Power, they formed an intense and close bond which led them to flying away to a remote part of South America for several weeks, in Power's private plane. Ever since, there has been strong speculation that Power may have been experimenting with his sexuality in this emotionally tumultuous period, and that he and Romero may have been lovers during this time. In 1948, Power had starred alongside Gene Tierney in That Wonderful Urge, a light-hearted romantic comedy, and later that year, Luck of the Irish hit theaters, starring Power and Anne Baxter. He featured in a couple more films before the end of the decade, and also had his first appearance on television in What's My Line? In 1950, Power appeared in The Black Rose, playing a disinherited Saxon nobleman who leaves England in search of fortune in the East. The film co-starred Orson Welles and Cecile Aubry, and was shot in Warwickshire Castle and various Moroccan locations, including Casablanca. Welles, strapped for cash to fund his adaptation of Othello, reluctantly took the role. Some of the film's extras were reportedly hired from a local brothel. That same year, Power returned to the stage, starring in Mr. Roberts at London's Coliseum. His performance as the frustrated naval officer wowed audiences, and the show sold out for 6 months. Power's dissatisfaction with his recent film projects continued to grow. One of these, 1950s American Guerrilla in the Philippines, told the story of American soldiers stranded in the Philippines during World War II, who formed resistance groups to fight Japanese forces. The film, shot just before the Korean War began, used refurbished American ships to stand in for Japanese ones. Director Fritz Lang reportedly took on the project for financial reasons and later disavowed it entirely. In 1951, Power starred opposite Anne Blythe in I'll Never Forget You, a romantic fantasy about a scientist who travels back in time to 18th century London and falls in love. That same year, he appeared in Rawhide, a western about a stagecoach worker and a female traveler who are held hostage by outlaws. Co-starring Susan Hayward, the film was praised for its tight storytelling. While some noted Power was slightly past his prime, his performance remained convincing enough to keep audiences engaged. Power and Linda finally overcame the trauma of their early attempts to have a child and welcomed 2 daughters, Romina Francesca and Taryn, in 1953. However, Power's infidelity continued unabated, including a high-profile affair with Anita Ekberg during the filming of Mississippi Gambler. Other romantic entanglements included Vogue editor Mary Robley and British actress Thelma Fay. Power even proposed to Robley, though the relationship fizzled out. Power and Christian had initially been slated to star together in Mississippi Gambler, but the role intended for Christian went to Piper Laurie after a standout audition. Laurie later described the process as grueling, saying she had to walk on burning coals to get the part. Power earned $1 million for the film, a staggering fee for the time, while Laurie's performance put her on the Hollywood A-list. Christian, however, felt humiliated by losing the role, and she felt her husband should have advocated for her. He once said to Christian, "Why do you worry? Why don't you get yourself a lover too?" She did just that, beginning an affair with actor Edmund Purdom. The betrayal soured their relationship from Power's perspective, and the couple divorced. Despite Fox's efforts to woo him back with a leading role in The Robe, Power declined. Instead, he returned to the stage, joining Judith Anderson and Raymond Massey in a touring production of John Brown's Body. Directed by Charles Laughton, the production embarked on a grueling 4-year tour across the US and Canada, covering 30,000 miles by bus. Along the way, John Brown's Body performed in 40 states, multiple Canadian provinces, and enjoyed an 8-week Broadway run. Power's dedication to the demanding schedule highlighted his commitment to his craft beyond the silver screen. In 1955, Tyrone Power was back on the stage as part of the original Broadway cast of The Dark Is Light Enough. This unusual play was about the reactions of a noblewoman during a Hungarian rebellion against Austrian rule. That same year, Power starred in John Ford's The Long Grey Line, a Columbia Pictures release co-starring Maureen O'Hara. The film told the story of an Irish immigrant who begins as a civilian employee at West Point and rises to become an NCO and instructor over a 50-year career. While the performances were decent, one reviewer from Spectator magazine said, "It was the longest and grayest film she had ever endured." Power's long association with 20th Century Fox finally ended with Untamed in 1955, a historical drama set in 19th century South Africa. Power looked back on his Fox years with mixed feelings, saying, "Fox did a lot for me, and the feeling is mutual. Let's face it though, I've done an awful lot of stuff that's a monument to public patience." Untamed was yet another tiresome shoot and had all kinds of production challenges, not least its requirement of some 2,500 Zulu extras, which made the film prohibitively expensive for many studios. It was banned in India for what authorities said were disparaging depictions of African life. Free from Fox and the treadmill of tedious and uninspired 1950s Hollywood pictures, Power toured England with a production of George Bernard Shaw's The Devil's Disciple. The tour also gave him time to think long and hard about his romantic life, and when he returned, he realized that his marriage was over. Following their divorce, Linda Christian became embroiled in a whole range of legal troubles, including a high-profile case in which she was accused of refusing to return expensive jewelry tied to a bounced check. Her fascinating life deserves a video all of its own, so stay tuned for that a little later in 2025. Power's next major film was The Story of Eddie Duchin in 1956. He played the titular pianist and band leader in a biographical drama co-starring Kim Novak. The set was bad-tempered and there was a serious lack of chemistry between the leads, but nonetheless the film was a box office hit, ranking as the 12th highest-grossing movie of the year. Around this time, Power began laying the groundwork for his own theater company. He hired writer Nora Sayer to read and recommend plays, a period she later chronicled in her fascinating memoir, On the Wing. Also, following his troubled marriage and his various other exploits, it seemed he was happy to be a bachelor again for a while. However, he did have a relationship with Swedish actress Maj Zetterling, who lived with him from 1956 to 1958. In 1957, Power starred in The Sun Also Rises, an adaptation of Ernest Hemingway's classic novel. Co-starring Ava Gardner and featuring Errol Flynn, the film followed a group of disillusioned American expatriates living in France and Spain during the 1920s. Hemingway, however, famously walked out of a screening after only 25 minutes, declaring that Errol Flynn's performance was a soul-redeeming quality. This was a slightly disingenuous statement from Papa, given that Flynn did not appear until nearly an hour into the film. Behind the scenes, there was all kinds of trouble as the cast and Hemingway himself campaigned to have young actor Robert Evans removed from the project. Darryl Zanuck dismissed their various protests with his now famous line, "The kid stays in the picture." Evans was the Hollywood equivalent of a made man after this, and he had a long career producing classics such as Rosemary's Baby, Chinatown, and, of course, The Godfather. Later that year, Power reluctantly took on the role of Leonard Vole in Witness for the Prosecution, an adaptation of Agatha Christie's celebrated courtroom drama. Hesitant to make more films, Power was persuaded by director Billy Wilder, who offered him $300,000 and a share of the profits. The film, co-starring Marlene Dietrich and Charles Laughton, told the gripping story of a veteran British barrister defending a murder suspect in a trial filled with unexpected twists. Witness for the Prosecution became one of Power's most acclaimed films, and is a real masterpiece of dramatic depth on his part, which was a perfect complement to the brilliance of Dietrich and Laughton. Power later said it was one of only 3 films in which he felt genuinely proud of his work. Marlene Dietrich's performance, playing a woman hopelessly in love, was reportedly fueled by a real-life crush on Power. Her advances, however, are said to have embarrassed him. Interestingly, in the film, Laughton's character is suffering severe health problems caused by smoking. However, off-screen it was Power who was by now beginning to feel the burden of his unhealthy lifestyle, having been a heavy smoker and drinker throughout his adult life. Now in his 40s, his body was showing signs of the troubles to come. Amid his busy career, Power found another new love. In May 1958, he married 26-year-old Debbie Ann Menardos. She was known to Power as a friend of Linda Christian's brother-in-law, and to most people as a former lover of Elvis Presley. The couple wed in Tunica, Mississippi, Elvis's hometown, and soon announced they were expecting a child. For Power, who had long hoped for a son to carry on his legacy, this news was wonderful. Menardos, seemingly devoted to Power and content in their relationship, once said, "He's beautiful. Every way there is. He's beautiful." He turned 44 years old the same month of his marriage, and he was entering his prime years in the best possible way. He'd finally fallen in love with someone who truly seemed to love him. He had a child on the way, and the frustrations of his Hollywood career were behind him. He was immensely wealthy and free to indulge his love of stage acting without any major financial concerns. It had been a lot of work to get to this point, but it really looked like Tyrone Power had made it to the good life. However, nature, in her cruel way, had other plans. In September 1958, Power and Menardos arrived in Madrid, where he was set to star in Solomon and Sheba. The couple planned to take short trips to Italy and Switzerland during breaks in filming to spend time together as part of their ongoing honeymoon period. In fact, on set, the pair were inseparable, to the point where the producers decided to step in and ask her if she wanted a role in the film as a concubine. "I don't give a hoot about acting," she said. "You're always underfoot anyway," they said. "May as well get paid for it." One morning would be particularly grueling. Power was in the robes of the ancient king, but also barefoot on an icy cold stone floor. The scene was a long and complex duel that required a lot of physical exertion. Power had always been susceptible to the cold, even since childhood, and he had also suffered a depleting bout of dysentery. His wife told him he looked unwell in the morning and pleaded with him to take the day off. But Power wasn't about to let his cast and crew down. After the 20th take of the fight scene with George Sanders, Power collapsed. Power had suffered a massive heart attack. He died en route to the hospital in the back of Gina Lollobrigida's car, which had been commandeered as an ambulance. There was no doctor available on set at the time of the incident, and the best they could do was try to give him some brandy. His wife, who had been concerned about his heavy workload and smoking habits, he was reportedly consuming 3 to 4 packs a day, had urged him to slow down. The heart attack was attributed to both his family history, with many members of his family dying young from heart issues, and his unhealthy lifestyle. The news soon made it around the world. His dear friend Ava Gardner allegedly collapsed with grief when she was told the news. Linda Christian, equally devastated, insisted to friends that her astrologer had warned her that Tyrone would die suddenly just days prior. All alone now and pregnant in a freezing Madrid hotel room, Deborah Power felt like the world had collapsed in on her. Tyrone Power often expressed two heartfelt wishes: to have a son and to die while performing. On the set of Solomon and Sheba, his stress levels were palpable. He had a family history of heart problems, but preferred not to confront the details of his health. When the studio insisted on a medical checkup, including a cardiogram, he refused. And in his final battle, he received his wish: to die doing what he loved best, acting. 2 months after Power's passing, his widow Deborah gave birth to the son he had always dreamed of. She named him Tyrone William Power IV, ensuring the family legacy would live on. Tyrone IV pursued his own acting career, appearing in films like California Casanova and Cocoon. Power's funeral on November 21, 1958, was held at the Hollywood Cemetery with full military honors. He had remained active in the Marine Corps Reserve and held the rank of major. The ceremony took place at the Chapel of the Psalms, near the graves of Douglas Fairbanks Sr. and Jr. Notable pallbearers included Charles Lawton, Raymond Massey, and Cesar Romero, who delivered a eulogy written by George Sanders. Sanders summed up Power's life, saying, "I shall always remember Tyrone Power as a man who gave more of himself than it was wise for him to give, until in the end, he gave his life." Power's gravestone bore the simple yet poignant inscription, "Good night, sweet prince." His distant cousin, Laurence Olivier, read John Gillespie Maggie Jr.'s poem, High Flight, at the gravesite, and a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet was added: "There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. The readiness is all." Henry King, who had introduced Power to flying, piloted a plane over the ceremony to pay tribute to his friend. Each year on November 15th, admirers gather at his grave to commemorate his legacy, a tradition that continues decades after his passing. Power's last completed project, a public service announcement on recognizing heart attack symptoms, was a bitterly ironic reminder of his untimely death. Power's legacy is a mix of triumphs and missed opportunities. His career was shaped in part by the decisions of Daryl Zanuck, who often blocked roles that could have elevated Power's profile. Zanuck turned down Power's participation in Gone with the Wind and Viva Zapata, while other roles went to stars like Marlon Brando and William Holden. Power himself declined parts during periods of disillusionment, including From Here to Eternity and The Barretts of Wimpole Street. Despite these setbacks, Power remains one of the top box office stars of all time, according to Quigley Publishing's International Motion Picture Almanac. Films like Nightmare Alley showcased his willingness to push boundaries and explore vulnerability, proving his talent extended far beyond his good looks. That's all from me. Thanks for watching, and if you made it this far, I'd be delighted if you'd considered subscribing to the channel or sharing the video with a friend. Until next week, sweet dreams.